2 weeks ago before Easter, we were looking at Mark 14, and we did it a little differently than we did most of our messages this year, where we would just look at a passage and break it down. We took the whole chapter and wanted to really look at two themes. First was the disciples' unfaithfulness to Jesus, and then this week we're going to be looking at Jesus's faithfulness. And so I just want you to just imagine this. Imagine this guy who, ever since middle school, has just had this huge crush on one of his best friends, and she never saw him as more than a friend. And every single day he would just ask her on a date. Every single day he would say, "Hey, will you go out with me? Hey, let's go on a date." Every single day, over and over again, he pursued this girl, and she said no. And then finally, like sophomore, junior year, the girl says, "You know what? Yes, I will go on a date with you." And they go on a date. They have a great time. And so they start dating. They go on a couple more dates. And then he starts hearing that she's also gone on a date with the starting quarterback, the lead in the musical, his best friend, some random guy in the band. Like, she's just going on these other dates while still dating him. And she claims that she loves him, but yet she's still going on these other dates. And yet the guy clearly loves her much deeper than the love that's being returned. So imagine if you were the guy in this situation, how would you feel? What would you want to do? What would you don't say it out loud. Don't feel like you have to say it out loud or send it through the chat or anything like that. But I just want you to think about, like, if you were in that situation, would you continue dating that girl? Would you want to be in that situation? The reality is, for most of us, we would probably say no. We'd be like, you know what? I'm done with this. You keep hurting me. You keep breaking my heart. I'm done. But the reality is, we are all like the girl in that story. Different things draw us away from Jesus, whether it's our academics, what college we're going to get into. Can I get into college? Do I want to go to college? Or maybe it's your athletics, and it's, if I just train hard enough and I do this and I throw everything I got into this sport, it will make me happy. It will make me whole. As long as I make that team, or as long as I'm the starter. Maybe for you, it's your music you want, or theater, or books, or whatever it may be for you. But these other things, these good things that we have, draw us away from God. They become idols in our heart, and we put them above God. And so when we're unfaithful, he's still faithful for us, or to us and for us. And we see that throughout Mark 14. So we're going to look at three separate instances today, starting with Mark 14, 17 through 22. And so feel free to read it on your physical Bible if you want. Feel free to turn to Mark 14, but it will be on your screen as well. So Mark 14, 17 through 22. And when it was evening, he came with the 12. And as they were reclining at a table and eating, Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one of you who is eating with me." They began to be sorrowful and say to him one after another, "Is it I?" He said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man had he not been born." And so Jesus shows his faithfulness to us here, because even as he's about to be betrayed, he decides he's going to share a meal with the 12. We all flee. We saw that when we were last in Mark 14. We all flee. And even Judas is here, who is going to betray him. And yet Jesus decides he's going to have a meal with them. Even now in our culture, to have a meal is incredibly relational. Like Chad said, one of the things that they got to do was get takeout and social distance, eat with friends, just to feel some normalcy again. Like, sharing a meal with someone is a relational thing to do. But in this culture, even more so. Like, You didn't really eat with strangers. You didn't really eat with people who weren't of your class or of your belief system. That's why it was so mind-boggling back in Mark 1 or 2, where Jesus is literally eating with sinners. And the religious leaders of the day call him out for it, because by eating with the sinners, by eating with the losers and the outcast of that day, he was literally saying that I have a relationship with them. And Jesus, again, is showing that he has a relationship with the 12 here. But he knows that one of them is going to betray him. And so imagine you could eat with anybody on earth. You know you only have one meal left and you can eat with anyone. Would you pick the person that you knew would betray you to share that meal with? I think if we're being honest, we know the answer is no. And yet, this is exactly what Jesus does. Truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. He shares one of his last meals with the man that is going to betray him. And I saw a pastor post this over Holy Week. I believe it was on Monday, Thursday, and he said this, and it just it shook me. I found it incredibly touching, and I was just kind of in awe of Jesus, because he said, if I had one last meal, I wouldn't spend it with a person I knew would betray me, yet love does. And it was just kind of mind-boggling to me, because I was like, yeah, there's a lot of people I would not want to have my last meal with. And I know that just looking at my own heart, and it didn't take long for me to think through that. I would probably pick someone that I loved and I knew loved me. And yet Jesus, out of love, ate with those who would betray him. He is faithful even when we're not. And so jumping down to Mark 14, 32 through 50. So this is a longer passage. And we looked at it last week, but we're going to look at it again and really see where Jesus' faithfulness just shines here. And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to the disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And he came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. And again, he went and prayed, saying the same words. And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hand of sinners. Rise and let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And immediately while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd of swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut his ear off. And Jesus said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled. And so again, they all left him and fled. We all betray him. It's not just Judas. We all do it. We all run away. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. And Jesus shows his faithfulness for us by being faithful when we're sinners. Quite simply, that's it. But he also shows that he is faithful to the Father. And We see it in the garden. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little further, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. Like, he went to the Father. He was distressed. He was scared. He knew what was coming. In Old Testament literature, a cup is used as a sign of wrath. Like, this is used over and over again throughout Old Testament literature as a sign of the wrath of God. And so when Jesus is saying, take this cup from me, he's quite literally saying, take your wrath away from me. And I want to read from one of my favorite resources, one that Rachel introduced me to back in college, called the Jesus Storybook Bible. And it's written for kids. We actually have it in our nursery. This is our nursery's copy of it. And I think it just does such a good job to just capture the essence and the emotion going on in this story. And so I encourage y'all to approach it with a childlike faith and just really look at the emotion of Jesus throughout this. Jesus walked ahead alone into the dark. He needed to talk to his heavenly Father. He knew it was time for him to die. They had planned it long ago, he and his Father. Jesus was going to take the punishment for all the wrong things anybody had ever done or would ever do. Papa, Father, Jesus cried, and he fell to the ground. Is there any other way to get your children back, to heal their hearts, to get rid of the poison? But Jesus knew there was no other way. All the poison of sin was going to have to go into his own heart. God was going to pour into Jesus's heart all the sadness and brokenness in the people's hearts. He was going to pour into Jesus's body all the sickness in people's bodies. God was going to have to blame his son for everything that had gone wrong. It would crush Jesus. But there was something else, something even more horrible. When people ran away from God, they lost God. It was what happened when they ran away. Not being close to God was like a punishment. Jesus was going to take that punishment. Jesus knew what it meant. He was going to lose his Father, and that Jesus knew would break his heart into two. Violent sobs shook Jesus's whole body. Then Jesus was quiet, like a lamb. I trust you, Papa, he said. Whatever you say, I will do. Like, Jesus shows his faithfulness to us because he remains faithful to the Father, and he sticks to the plan. Last week, when we looked at the same exact passage, this is going on in the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane was a garden. And so while this is going on, it drew me, when I was doing my own study of this passage last week, it mirrored the Garden of Eden in my mind. And so when I saw our sinfulness in the garden, just as we saw back at the beginning with Adam and Eve and the serpent, we saw sin in the world, enter in the world at the garden. And then we saw man betraying God again in this garden. And I was really excited when one of my favorite pastors, as I was studying this passage again this week, made the same exact point. But he took it a step further than I did. And I think it's absolutely beautiful. He talked about how here Jesus sticks to the plan. He remains faithful. Everyone else in the scene is failing. Everyone else is running away. The disciples are running away. Judas is betraying Jesus into the hand of the high priest who have been waiting for the Messiah for so long, are literally arresting the man that they have been looking forward to. And it's just great, like in this crazy scene where everyone's failing, where everyone is sinning, only one person is passing the test. There's a test that happens in the Garden of Eden, and man fails. Adam fails, Eve fails, the serpent fails, where they disobey God and they turn their back on God. This is happening here again, and yet only one person in this entire story, and only one person in all of history gets it right. And I think it's absolutely beautiful that in a garden is where it all went wrong, and in a garden is where God made it right through Jesus, because he is faithful to us even when we don't deserve it. When we all flee, he remains faithful. And so the last passage of Jesus' faithfulness I want us to look at is Mark 14. We're going to look at 61 and 65, but to give some context, so Jesus ends up being arrested, they all flee, and then he's put before the high priest and other religious leaders, and they start interrogating him, they start questioning him, and they're asking him over and over again all these questions, and then picking up in Mark 14:61. But he remained silent and made no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his garments and said, "What further witnesses do we need? You have heard this blasphemy. What is your decision?" And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. And so, lastly, we see Jesus' faithfulness by again, sticking with the plan, declaring who he is. To say "I am" is to make the statement that you are God. It references the burning bush. And so Jesus here is declaring himself as God, and he is saying that he's going to sit at the right hand of God, and that he will be coming with the clouds of heaven. So he's saying, "I am God. I'm going to sit at the right hand of the power," which shows that he is one with God. Not that he's just a servant, but that he is literally one with God. When you are at the right hand of the King, you are seen as in union with him. And so he is God. He is the King, and that he's going to come back again. This has all been promised in Scripture, and Jesus is saying, "I am that promise." And the high priest was literally so angry at this because he assumed that he was lying, that he was making a false claim, that he was speaking blasphemy, that he was so mad he literally ripped his clothes off. And the others started beating him to a pulp, spitting on him, striking him. And yet Jesus shows his faithfulness because he came to die for those people, just as he came to die for you and me when we are just like the girl in the story I shared at the beginning. When we run away, when our affection is drawn from something else, even when we have one who loves us and is faithful to us.